Ladies and gentlemen, members of the crew, the members of the press corps, the joint investigation by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights is a culmination of preliminary discussions between the two institutions on how to respond to the human rights situation in the Tigray region following the outbreak of the conflict in early November 2020. These discussions led to a formal request from the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission to conduct a joint investigation on the human rights situation in Tigray, which was accepted by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And the objective of this joint investigation included, among other things, accurately documenting human rights violations by all parties to the conflict, furthering the accountability process and advocating for effective remedies, providing clear, actionable, and gender-sensitive recommendations, and identifying serious violations to ensure redress for victims and prevent recurrence of similar occurrences in the future. And prior to the commencement of our investigation, the joint investigation team agreed on its method of work to guide its investigation, consistent with the practice of international fact-finding bodies. It has adopted various methodological approaches, including the adoption of a reasonable grounds to believe standard of proof for factual determinations of incidents and occurrences. The investigation was carried out within the framework of international human rights law, humanitarian law, refugee law, and relevant national laws of Ethiopia. The joint investigation team conducted field investigations from 16th of May to end of August and investigated alleged violations by all parties to the conflict from the 3rd of November of last year, 2020, until the time of the unilateral ceasefire declared by the federal government and its withdrawal from the Tigray region, which was end of June. The joint investigation team carried out investigations in Mekelle, in Wukro, Samre, and nearby areas in Samre, in Alamata, in Bora, Maicho, Dansha, Maikadra, and Humara. The joint investigation team also interviewed internally displaced persons from various parts of Tigray, including Adiaro, Adi Haragai, Adigrat, Adwa, Badme, Dangolat, Humara, Korem, Maikadra, Mekelle, Kiha, Shimalba, Shire, Shiraro, Tamben, and Zalambasa. We have also further conducted investigations in Addis Ababa and other affected locations such as Gondar and Bahar Dar in the Amara region. The findings in the report rely primarily on first-hand testimony from victims and witnesses, and written material provided important context in some instances to corroborate interviews. As such, the joint investigation team conducted a total of 269 confidential interviews with victims and witnesses of alleged violations and abuses, and it held 64 meetings with federal and regional authorities and representatives of the UN agencies and NGOs, community groups, medical personnel, and other sources. This report does not in any way purport to be an exhaustive record of all relevant incidents that occurred during this period, but it fairly and reasonably illustrates the main types of and overall patterns of violations and abuses over the period in question. Based on the information gathered and analyzed by the joint investigation team, there are reasonable grounds to believe that all parties to the conflict have committed major violations and abuses in the context of the conflict, including 1. The Ethiopian forces, the Eritrean forces, and the Tigrayan forces. All parties to the conflict have committed major violations and abuses in the context of the conflict, including, I would list some of them as an example. Number 1, the ENDF, EDF, and TSF carried out attacks on civilians, resulting in the deaths and injuries of men, women, boys and girls, civilian objectives which enjoy special protection under international humanitarian law, such as health facilities, schools, places of worship, and houses were indiscriminately attacked. Parties to the conflict failed to take sufficient precautions to protect civilians and civilian objects. For example, 29 civilians, including 3 children, were killed in Mekelle due to shelling by the ENDF on the 28th of November of last year.